it's a real privilege to work and build towards something that you really believe in. And if anybody out there has an itch to start a company or a project, I would say scratch that itch and talk to people that you trust about that idea. And also be judicious about who you talk with about your idea, because an idea in its early stage is very vulnerable, and therefore you are very vulnerable because you are sort of very enmeshed with this idea. And there are people who will build it up and give honest feedback, whether it's encouraging or not. But you don't want to sort of share your pearls with anybody. It's not about keeping an idea secretive. It's more about who do you trust to speak truth into you and not project themselves onto your idea. So just be wise about who you share that idea with, but definitely share it and talk about it, because that's how it will get refined.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Look Up podcast. I'm your host, Mark Weinstein, and as always, I sincerely appreciate your presence and your continued support as you travel along on this journey of discovery with me. You might have noticed over this latest season that the episodes have grown in terms of the topics that they cover. I'm spending a lot more time with entrepreneurs, speaking to a lot of individuals about broader philosophy. We are no longer just confining this show to social media and the impact of technology on our mental health, although we will continue to dive into subjects of consciousness and mental health and yogic philosophy and any other subjects that you want to explore along with me. I'm loving it. I'm loving the shift. I get to meet an incredibly diverse group of characters that all bring a unique perspective to help me frame my view of the world. This beautiful, complex place that's all just a part of the cosmic dance that we all are so blessed to be a part of. And again, right, the purpose of this show is in service to all of you, the listeners. So always feel free to reach out to me, marc@thelookuppodcast.com, or Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN on Instagram. Man, I'm loving this so much. Thank you. What an incredible time this is. I'm recording on March 31st, 2020, and boy, does it feel like March has been a long month. What a roller coaster ride of a month. We are smack in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. The US is on lockdown. I'm here in France recording. This episode that I'm about to introduce was the first episode that I recorded in 2020. We recorded the first week of February, so a little over a month ago today. There's a bit of a lag in my releasing episodes right now, but we'll soon catch up, I'm sure. And I was introduced to this guest by my friend Masha Drokova, who is a venture investor at Day One Ventures, and I believe that they are investors in Philip's company, Nebia. I wasn't sure exactly what we were going to talk about at first. I don't enjoy making these episodes simply a promotional vehicle for companies, but I trust Masha implicitly, and I looked at Philip's background and saw that he did a ton of work in the impact space and particularly in emerging economies, and I thought there was a lot that we could chat about. So Philip Winter, my guest, let me tell you a little bit something about him. Philip is the co-founder and CEO of Nebia, and Nebia is reinventing the way that people shower. They're creating a better experience, a beautiful design, and unprecedented water savings. Philip explains the water savings in our conversation. Nebia has a direct-to-consumer approach that changes the game for hardware companies that aren't building just electronic devices, but also things like shower heads. And the Nebia shower actually can reduce your water consumption by somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 gallons a year, 50% of the average individual's water consumption in a given year, which is pretty great considering that just in recent memory, we've had a number of cities enter into major water crisis mode and face droughts, my home city of Los Angeles has had its own challenges with water. So prior to Nebia, Philip was a Princeton-in-Latin America Fellow working at Endeavor in Mexico City. He has a passion for the confluence of business and international development work. He earned a bachelor's in international relations at my alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, where he was also a member of the varsity golf team. And Nebia, his company, has some pretty incredible investors like Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and the team at Y-Combinator, which is the leading tech incubator in Silicon Valley. Super cool company. And one of my favorite moments in this episode is when Philip is describing his Y-Combinator interview and how the president of YC at that time, Sam Altman, asked to take a shower after 10 minutes of interview and decided to invest, which is pretty cool. So we don't just talk about Nebia, of course. We keep it a little bit broader. I'm super interested in the trials and tribulations of building a company as an entrepreneur. Nebia is one of those classic examples of the overnight success, quote unquote, that has been 6 years in the making. We talk about what it means to be an entrepreneur focused on impact, the principles that have supported Philip through we discussed the vibe in Silicon Valley and what's changing over there, including some of the habits of entrepreneurs and even the capture of some traditional ceremonies and medicines like psychedelics that are now being used as life hacks. And of course, you can't speak to a founder in the sustainability space without defining sustainability, talking about the challenges of impact and impact investing, and speaking about global water consumption. And we even touch on the potential for a global water-related crisis, which is probably challenging to think about right now, given where we're at with the current pandemic. But it is certainly within the realm of possibility if the economy starts to ramp back up in the way that it was before coronavirus BC. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you'll see that Philip is incredibly intelligent and thoughtful and measured in his words. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun, and it really re-inspired me to keep going with this show at a time when I was just over a month ago. It's crazy to think. It feels so long ago now, but concerned as to whether I would keep going. But here I am, and here you are listening. So sit back and enjoy this episode with Philip Winter, CEO of Nebia. All right, Philip, thank you for joining me for the first recorded episode of the Look Up podcast in 2020. I'm excited to have you on here and to properly connect.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you here, to be a part of it.
Yeah, so I gave a little bit of background in the intro on you and Nebia, but I guess the thing that I'm most curious about is why did you decide to start a shower head business?
all great ideas come in the bathroom, right? Like taking a shower. No, it's sort of a long story, and it dates back prior to me. So I have two co-founders, and one of them used to run a large chain of high-end health clubs in Mexico City, where he's from. And
love Mexico City. I was just actually there this weekend.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
It's a really special place. And so Mexico City is a city of 20 million people. It's at like 7,000 feet of elevation. And there's no major body of water nearby. It's a scarce resource. It's in high demand. And so in this high-end chain of gyms where they had about 25,000 people per day taking showers, they were really concerned about the high use of water, and it was one of his highest variable costs. And so Carlos, my co-founder, asked his dad, who was at that point in his mid-80s, obviously retired, he was an engineer and tinker sort, to help him find a solution. And it was really his dad who had the idea to use these atomizing nozzles that have been used in other industries. They're used in internal combustion engines. They're used in agricultural sprays and rocket engines for fuel injection, and make them into a shower prototype, which had never really been done before. And that was the origin of how it all started. Fast forward a few years, this was a side project for Carlos and his father. I'm living in Mexico City, working at a nonprofit called Endeavor, which helps entrepreneurs scale their businesses. And I met Carlos, and he told me about this side project that he had with his dad, and he had the shower and saved a lot of water. And he had a prototype at his house if I wanted to come over and try it. So I went over to his house and took a shower in the prototype, and loved the idea. And we started working together. And this was in late 2013. My background is in international relations. I sort of worked at nonprofits. And I had also coincidentally worked on a composting toilet that doesn't use any water for flood-prone areas in the developing world. So
I saw this. This was toilets for people.
That's right. That was like one of the first things I did out of college. And so I had sort of an interest in the area. I didn't think I would graduate college and do two things in the bathroom space. That's just sort of the way it worked out. And when we started working together, our first approach was, let's develop this technology and make a product that can be mass distributed to hundreds of millions of people in the developing world, parts of Africa, Asia, India, Latin America, where water scarcity is a really pressing issue. And we sort of played around with that idea. And it wasn't long before we sort of looked at it from a different approach. And we said, well, what if rather than starting at the base of the pyramid, making something that's mass distributed, we make a product and a brand that is something that people desire and actually want to have. And in so doing, can we have more influence and more impact sort of over a long time horizon? The smart home movement was just beginning then. Nest, I don't know if you remember, the smart thermostat company had sort of just launched. The Internet of Things was a nascent term, but people were starting to talk about it. And we said, well, what if we make it about design and innovation in the sustainability space and really build a brand around that? And so we thought about that idea. We came out to the Bay Area and met with some folks, sort of tested the idea. California was in the height of an historic drought at that point in 2013. And so there's a lot of receptiveness to the idea of saving water. And not long after that, we were convinced to do this. And so I finished sort of the 1-year fellowship that I had at this nonprofit. And a few months later, packed my bags and moved to San Francisco. Started the thing here.
That's great. And there's so much there that I want to touch on. I'd like to go back in time and start with your work in the nonprofit field. And it sounds like you spent a year at Endeavor, or how long were you there?
I was there for 1 year.
And what type of work were you doing there?
Yes, I was there on a fellowship, a program called Princeton-in-Latin America. It was just a fellowship that I was a part of, and the organization is I don't know, in 25 or 30 different countries. It's based out of New York. And the goal is, can we create ecosystems of entrepreneurship in markets that don't have an ecosystem? And in so doing, foster entrepreneurship as a vehicle for economic development and growth. And there's been a lot of focus on micro enterprises and microfinance, but there hasn't been a lot of focus on really scaling up companies from, I don't know, just say $10 million to $100 million, which in the developing world is really a big deal. And it's all sort of focused on connecting mentors with entrepreneurs, with no other benefit than helping their country and their sort of local economies prosper. And it was a really inspiring model, and it's had a tremendous amount of impact. And if you think about a place like Mexico City, where they have an office, or in Brazil, or in Amman, Jordan, there aren't a lot of case studies and examples that people can point to as like entrepreneurial heroes. You either had to be well connected, part of a royal family, or part of a sort of certain social class to be able to do something. And this was all about creating, what is inherent in Silicon Valley, which is a very tight feedback loop. A lot of successful entrepreneurs who then invest and advise and become mentors. And so my role was working with entrepreneurs in the selection process. There was sort of like a rigorous process saying, hey, who would we work with? Who would we help? And I would work with those entrepreneurs to create business case studies of what they were building.
And how did you think about I think you said massive impact on their community or on their country? Like, how did you think about impact and measuring impact as you were evaluating these entrepreneurs? Did you take kind of like a venture lens and look at market size and competitive landscape, things like that? Or was there something beyond the capitalist drive?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think one of the things that's unique about Endeavor is that it's market and sort of business segment agnostic, as long as it's not doing something that's considered unethical, and it's all about scale. And the idea is that the biggest companies in an economy are the ones that have obviously create the most jobs, have the biggest impact on GDP, but also generate the most amount of money and investment in R&D, and can create other sort of create successful managers who can become advisors and mentors to other folks. And so the way that Endeavor thinks about impact is on a broad scale of, hey, big businesses are the ones that really move the needle in an economy. And I think that influenced my understanding around the importance of scale. I didn't study business as an undergrad. I studied international relations. And so for me, it was like a condensed MBA in a year of working with like 25 or 30 entrepreneurs really closely to understand the key elements of their business and what they were working on.
Yeah, it sounds like a good crash course in business and finance. Maybe better than the 4 years at Wharton, to be honest. So you move from the nonprofit space, you meet your co-founder. One thing that really struck me is you guys are really starting to gain momentum, a lot of notoriety in the press today. I think you were in TechCrunch and Wired and a couple of other Bloomberg, and a few other big publications over the last month. But we often hear about the overnight success that took 5 to 10 years, and I feel like history just gets rewritten, right? And it's like, oh, this just happened, but you've been working at this for 6 years, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey, because I imagine it wasn't easy going for the last 6 years to really get this company churning the way that it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There are all the cliches about the ups and downs of a startup, I think, are very true. At least that's been my experience. And to be honest, it felt like for the first year, we set really ambitious goals. And sometimes it took us a little bit longer to get to them, but then we would sort of blow through that milestone by like 10 times. And then we sort of set a new guidepost and we blow through that. And that was the first year. It's like we had a ton of tailwind. And since that moment, it's been almost all headwind, and it's all been challenges and difficult.
Just beginner's luck kind of like comes to mind. I don't mean that, in a derogatory way. Just that is the experience, right? Of 1 year of tailwinds, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man.
And it's just been 5 years of, just going, straight into the current, which has made us, I guess, stronger, and more resilient, although it's put us out of business almost, a couple of times. And I guess sort of to put what I mean into context, like the essential story is we moved to San Francisco. I had a few prototypes, in hand, and I knew a few people. Like that was it. My Rolodex was like 3 or 4 people. And I would just take meetings with whoever would talk to me about their shower, and like 9 out of 10 meetings would go nowhere because people would be like, come on, you moved to San Francisco to do a shower startup and you don't even have an app. I was like, come on. 1 out of 10 would lead somewhere. The people would be like, wow, this is great. There's been no innovation in this space. I totally see what you're doing. It's a ubiquitous product. Like, here are 3 or 4 people I know who can help you. And so that really struck me when I moved here. It was like how quick people were to say, hey, I don't think what you're doing is great. You should change it these ways. Or I love what you're doing. And here are 3 or 4 of the most helpful people I know. And so within about a month and a half, we landed a pilot at Equinox Gyms, which for us was like, a super important milestone because we could set up some prototypes and talk to a couple hundred people per day and get feedback, which it's not that easy to get that much feedback on a shower. It's like, you got to get someone into a shower stall naked, try it, come out and tell you what they think. But a gym is great because there's a lot of foot traffic. And it just so happens that we met our first investors, in the gym just because of situation and where we were. So we were really fortunate. Then we did a pilot at Google. Then we did a pilot at Apple's campus. And then it went really badly. Like people were too cold. The product wasn't functioning the way that we wanted it to. And I was really distraught. I remember we got our first investment, on a Monday from fairly well-known investor. And 2 or 3 days later, we were doing this pilot at Apple, and it just went terribly. Like such to the point where the vast majority of people didn't like the product. And I had kind of maxed out in terms of my ideas of what we could do to improve it. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to return this money. This is so embarrassing. Like we don't have a ubiquitous product. But I just met this guy whose name is Gabe, who ended up becoming our third co-founder through a friend. And he was a mechanical engineer with a background in thermofluids. And coincidentally, he worked at Apple on the iPhone team. And I just met him. He said, Philip, don't worry. I've got a few ideas. Let me go back over the Christmas holiday break and dust off my old textbooks from my mechanical engineering thermofluids classes and come up with a model. And so he came back after the new year, had this model, and we improved the prototype by like 15 degrees Fahrenheit, it felt like an order of magnitude improvement. And we worked together for a couple of months. He was moonlighting in the evenings, coming back from work. And we finally convinced him to leave Apple to join us as our third co-founder. We applied to Y-Combinator. Somehow they gave us an interview because we were kind of sort of an odd applicant in that, again, we were a hardware product, didn't have software, electronics. And Y-Combinator is like one of the preeminent startup incubators. And we had this 10-minute interview. Like all of the interviews are 10 minutes, that's it. They make a decision for 10 minutes. And like they even have like an alarm clock on the table, so you don't go over the 10 minutes. And like 5 or 6 minutes into the interview, Sam Altman, who was the president of Y Combinator at the time, stands up and he goes, okay, I'm going to take a shower. We had brought our prototype to their offices to show them, thinking that they would like put their hand under it, feel the spray. And
he said, I'm going to take a shower. That's amazing.
And he's like, we're like, Sam, we didn't even bring a towel. Like, we didn't think we were going to shower. All we had was like this small hand towel that was like dirty. He's like, oh, I'll use that. So he went in and took a shower and loved it. And then we got into Y Combinator. We worked super hard to launch a Kickstarter campaign before the end of 3-month incubator. The Kickstarter blew up. We were in the New York Times and sort of written about all over the world. And that for us was a huge validation because it proved that the idea we were working on had appeal really around the world. There's something about a innovation in the space of water in a shower that really resonated with people. And so we raised $3 million on Kickstarter, and we raised a little bit more money from private investors, and we were off to the races. At that point, we had to turn away investors, people who wanted to put money in Nebia. Never again have I had necessarily the opportunity to do that. And that's what I mean when like sometimes you have this tailwind. And pretty much everything since then has been really hard.
What year was that around? Because you started this in 2013. So
that was summer of 2015.
So the first year you were in Mexico in your partner's gyms, basically getting the prototype sorted.
Working part-time because we each had other things we were working on.
Okay. And then the second year you personally moved out to San Francisco. Your partner stayed in Mexico and you were just hustling to try to meet the right people. Got this Equinox deal, and that kind of led you to Y Combinator, ton of investment, $3 million in 2015.
$3 million on Kickstarter. We raised private investment
I saw in some of the articles that Tim Cook invested in this company. So was that during the Equinox pilot, or is that timeline a little bit off in the articles?
It was during one of the gym pilots that we did early on, without saying exactly where we met. But we met in one of the gym pilots, and he loved what we were working on. He was one of the first people we met. He tried it for like 3 days in a row, gave a ton of feedback, and one of the things he said to me is because at that point it was a prototype, like it was pretty rudimentary.
So he and Eric Schmidt both invested pre Y Combinator?
Yeah.
Wow. Right. I'm shocked that you got an interview at Y Combinator then. I mean, come on.
I guess that probably had something to do with it, but one of the things that Tim Cook said was, because we were talking a little bit about the prototype and how we would go to market with it, and I told him, look, we've gotten some feedback from people who really don't like it, and he says, Phil, don't listen to the naysayers. We get naysayers all the time at Apple, and what you guys are doing is really innovative. So like, keep charging ahead. And I probably grew about 6 inches in that moment, and felt sort of a ton of confidence that, hey, here was somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about what the future looks like, and he can understand and see like the importance and relevance of this a couple of years out, even if it's still very much in its concept stage. And And so, I've obviously never forgotten that.
And how often are you in touch with him and Eric Schmidt and these other investors? And Sam Owen?
With some more than others. Tim is probably the person we speak with the most out of that group. A few times a year, I would say, either on the phone or email or occasionally meeting up and sort of showing the latest stuff that we're working on. He's a very very down to earth person, and I think the reason he was intrigued by Nebia is because of the emphasis on sustainability and sort of the overlap between that and product design. I think he's somebody who deeply cares a lot about the environment.
What's it like having investors and mentors of that caliber? I imagine that it's a double-edged sword in some ways, because it's incredible to have that backing, but at the same time, I'm imagining having another set of parents that I really don't want to let down.
Yeah, I think in our case, we've been really fortunate. All of these folks, we were really candid up front, saying, hey, we want to build something over the long term. We think this is a big problem, and there's no innovation in this space. And they were sort of all on board for that. The truth is that they're investing in this because it's a personal passion for them, and they believe in the project, and they believe enough in us to invest in us. And we've kind of always tried to be very candid in terms of the opportunities and the challenges that we face. But I think it's been nothing but helpful. If anything, it's helped us because it brings attention to what we're working on. Sometimes it's a bit of a distraction because that's what people want to focus on, whether sort of in the media and so forth. But I kind of have to pinch myself sometimes because we've been really fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of stepping back to the story. So now 2015, you have investment from Y-Combinator, you graduate from the class, you get, your round is overflowing. There's about 3 million that comes in. And as you said, it was never that easy. It wasn't that easy again to raise capital. So what happened then?
I think it was a confluence of several things. This was late 2015. We launched our Kickstarter 2 weeks before Y-Combinator's demo day, which is at the end of the 3-month incubator. And you pitch to a room of 250 investors, plus a lot of investors who sort of log in online to watch it. And we raised some private capital, enough for the next couple of years. And we set out to make this product. We had sold almost 10,000 units of a product that all we really had was a prototype. We didn't really know if it was possible to make it. We had promised a product that was Apple quality in a space that, didn't really have much innovation. And we wanted to deliver something that was Apple quality. And it took longer than we anticipated, trying to save as much water as humanly possible and make a phenomenal shower experience and make a product that's very easy to install in your home, and that has certain design elements and uses premium materials. It's challenging, to do that out of the gates. We wanted to make it in the US. There's this famous triangle in product design or architecture, where you have product quality at one end of the triangle, cost at the other end, and time at the third point. And you can only have two of those at a time. You can't have all three. You can't have great quality and do it at a great cost and do it fast. You have to choose 2 out of the 3. And we optimized for quality and time. And so that meant that cost was sort of the part that we left out of the equation.
And so your price point early on was quite high.
So the price point early on was high. We essentially it was around $500. But we had pre-sold a bunch on Kickstarter at less than that, basically at what ended up being cost. And there was a lot of sort of hard lessons, making hardware is hard. Hardware was really hot in the startup world, but it's really hard to make physical products at a certain quality and cost and price target. And we had sort of a lot of hard lessons throughout that period. I think we finally delivered that product, and it was a little bit behind schedule, but we delivered a great Gen 1 product, sort of had all those promises and had a ton of innovations beyond just the shower experience. And it definitely had opportunities for improvement. and we got to work on Gen 2 of that. It was around that time that we tried to raise a little bit more capital, and we did. And we saw a lot of our peer companies in the hardware, consumer tech space going out and raising 10, 20 plus $1 million rounds and scaling up the teams really fast. And we elected to take a different approach, which was to keep the team relatively lean and small, which meant it would take us a little bit longer to do things, but we would have an infrastructure and sort of an operating structure as a company that was easier to scale up and down, a little bit more manageable. And I think what's ended up happening is a lot of our pure hardware companies haven't made it, or those who have had exits or sort of made it to the next stage have done so, at multiples that didn't necessarily make a lot of money for the people involved. And I think the wisdom that I have gleaned from that, and my co-founders as we reflect, in 5 or 6 years, is building an innovative physical product as opposed to a direct consumer brand, a mattress or luggage or shoes or eyeglasses, where the innovation is simply the distribution, the go-to-market. In our case, we were trying to both innovate on distribution and go-to-market by selling online. But we were also trying to innovate on the product, and do something that didn't really exist. And we have 4 or 5 patents, and it's really hard. You can't really do both at once. You have to sort of pick one. And to make an innovative physical goods product, it takes 2 or 3 iterations to get the product dialed in, to get just the right feature set that customers actually really care about, to get the right price. It's what are people actually going to pay for this? And then to get the right cost, which is really important. And we've just launched our third product. And I think we now have a chance to really get there and scale it up. And it's unfortunate because a lot of these other companies that go on to raise really big rounds, at some point they don't hit that exit velocity with a product and they kind of run out of oxygen. Investors aren't willing to give them more money. But I think by staying lean, we're 15 people. We have an office in San Francisco. We have an office also in Mexico City. We've been able to iterate long enough because I think our thesis of building a company that's about innovation and sustainability in water is only more relevant now than it was when we started.
Interesting. So you said, one philosophy that you've learned is kind of keeping it lean, going with that lean startup mentality and not getting greedy on capital raising. You obviously could have expanded that first round if you really wanted to, diluted yourselves more, but had a little bit more runway. What other philosophies have guided you as an entrepreneur over the last 6 years or so? What's kept you sane?
For me, it's been really important in the difficult moments to know that what I'm working on is something that I deeply believe in. You have to have some degree of deep conviction in what you're doing, and it might vary. Some ideas are just a lot more heart grabbing than others. I'm a person, personally, I'm very driven by being connected to an idea, and I knew that had to be a big element. And so knowing that we're building a product that on some level is going to leave the world better off because we made the product. Even though we have, there's an environmental footprint to manufacturing and making our product, I think the net environmental impact is positive. And you couldn't say that for many products.
And this seems like a good time to ask, what is the water savings per unit?
It's between half of the water you use compared to a standard shower all the way up to about 65%. And
that's incredible. How many gallons of water is that per person? Do you guys have those metrics?
Yeah, so the average shower uses about 20 gallons per shower. And so that's, between 7,000 and 8,000 gallons of water per year. And you use half or slightly less than half of that when you shower with one of our products.
So if you think about it, if you're able to reach the scale that you obviously like to reach, which is probably millions of consumers, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions, I mean, the impact is absolutely massive as far as water use.
Yeah, I mean, to date, we estimate that our customers have saved a little over 200 million gallons of water. And that's with a premium product at a premium price point. was sort of our proof of concept. We've now just launched a product on Kickstarter, which is on Kickstarter through the end of February, and it costs around $200, which we think will take us from tens of thousands of homes into hundreds of thousands of homes. And we're working on more products that we think will take us into millions of homes. And so that was kind of our original strategy, to start at the top of the pyramid, to make a product people aspire to have, and to use that to sort of scale our technology and make it ever more accessible. It turns out like similar to the Tesla strategy of starting with a Roadster.
Yeah, it seems like the right approach because, there's so many companies that want to, you mentioned microfinance as an example, in places like Africa and Latin America, and they want to have this world changing mentality, as you said, at the bottom of the pyramid. But there's so much more low hanging fruit. Like, as I'm thinking through this idea now, the concept of having this type of shower throughout Africa, there seems like much more pressing opportunities to have an environmental impact there than a consumer product.
Absolutely. And for us, it was like, how could we build something that's sustainable and scalable and that people really want? And it came from an insight that, by and large, people don't want to save water in their shower. It's like, if you ever tried a low flow shower, they're generally not a very good experience, right?
I read some feedback online about this, actually. If it's cold out there, it sounds like it's a low flow shower is not as enticing.
People don't like saving water in their shower, by and large. And we said, well, if we can make a better shower experience that people like to use, the ability then to go into other products is far greater. And so our focus is, hey, what are other ways that people use water in the home that haven't been innovated on in a number of years? And can we make a better product experience?
What do you think? Washer, dryer, sinks?
I think everything is up for grabs. And there hasn't been meaningful innovation in most of those categories in a long time. And what becomes really interesting is when you start to track the quality of water that goes into people's homes, and you can collect that information and therefore help people treat the quality of water at the source into the house. And that's information and data that like municipalities and utilities and government doesn't even have. And can we avoid outbreaks of poor water quality?
Super interesting. One thing I heard from you is basically if this didn't have a sustainability angle, you might not have lasted the slog of 6 years because it was your passion for making an impact that really drove you here. Obviously, you want to start a good business, and you want to have success. You want to scale to a massive company, but it's this, closing in on an idea that you were passionate about that really helped drive you through the challenges of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, if you don't love what you're doing, I think the other thing I would add to that is working with really great people who you trust and admire. And I have two phenomenal business partners, and even though at times we might be at each other's necks, we have the same values at the end of the day, and like we know why each of us is in this. And we have we've been lucky to attract a fantastic team as well. And so those things are what make the tough moments really, much more bearable to get through.
How do you feel about the word sustainability today?
It's really funny you should ask that, because I have been sort of reflecting on this in the last few weeks. It seems like sustainability and climate change has reached a tipping point in the last 6 or 12 months in
yes,
sort of in the general public. There's a lot more awareness around sustainability and climate change related issues. But we've been working on this for 6 years, and many people have been working on this for decades longer than we have. And so I think it's fantastic that a lot more people are focused on these issues. I think we really need that. And unfortunately, when a term becomes really common, it gets diluted a little bit. And like sustainable compared to what? And so I think that is where we're going to need to be a little bit more focused as a society going forward. It's like we're sustainable, but relative to what?
And as you kind of move through your own process, I asked this earlier, how do you measure impact? How do you think about sustainability? I guess for your company, there's a clear, saving X number of gallons per year through our product. What other areas of this impact or sustainability kind of trend, let's call it, although I hope it's not just a trend, do you think are more than just greenwashing? Like how do we make an impact as a society? And also, I guess a follow on to that is you're coming at it from a private market perspective, with a bottom up approach, and then there's a lot of calls for top down. Regulate the banks, don't allow them to finance oil companies, things like that. I mean, do you believe in the efficacy of those types of top down strategies, or do you believe that greater good will come from the free market bottom up approach?
Very interesting and timely question with all the debate going on in this country right now. I think it's both. You can't have. I don't think you can solve with just one of the two approaches. You need to have people who are demanding change, activists. You need to have people who are working on those ideas from a science and engineering perspective, from making it relevant to, from a consumer standpoint. How do you distribute these things? How do you get them into the hands of people? How do you make it something that's financially viable? But if you don't have regulation, then incentives are often perverse, because there's always going to be regulation of some sort. Like the government is always going to be marking the course in some way, either by being very assertive or by being very hands off. And I think as a global society, it's really hard to question the fact that in the next few decades we will be getting more of our energy and more of our natural resources from renewables. And if we as a country don't see that as an opportunity and invest to become the world leaders in that, then we fall behind. And the same goes for every other country. So I think there's a lot of private opportunity and there's a lot of government and national responsibility to back those sorts of things. And so I think it requires bottoms up, top down, and people talking about it. And I really think we've reached a tipping point in the last year where people are much more aware of these issues and willing to make changes.
What industry or sector is the largest consumer of water worldwide?
Agriculture. Agriculture consumes the lion's share of water.
Is the technology that you've developed for showers applicable to agriculture or no?
It could be, and the truth is that it's already being used in some ways in agriculture. And so it's not a sort of a natural lane to go straight over, but we're asked this question fairly often, and our approach to this is, hey.
And I'm just sorry to interrupt. Do you have like order of magnitude or size estimates, like consumers using showers versus agriculture, just water use in gallons?
Agricultural use is estimated to be between 70 to 80% of water consumption. Yeah, and the rest is broken down by a number of things, from other sorts of institutional use to in-home use, consumption, and so forth. But our focus is, hey, the planet is 7 billion people right now, right? And we're in the next couple of decades going to be 10 billion people, and we have a finite supply of water for the additional 40% or so of population. And we're using more water per capita every year. Like that's going to be a major problem. And it's going to happen first in certain pockets of the world, like California, which was running out of water a few years ago. Cape Town, which became almost the first city in the world to run out of water a couple of years ago. Beijing has huge water shortages. Pakistan, Brazil, all of these different places. And there's no one really carrying the flag in terms of making innovative, sustainable solutions around water. If you think about energy, a number of companies come to mind in terms of innovative solutions for how we use energy, from solar panels to electric cars to smart thermostats.
Mostly Elon Musk companies.
Mostly Elon Musk companies. And we think the same thing needs to happen in water. And so if Nebia can serve as an inspiration to get more people to look at water and invest in sustainable solutions for water on a consumer level, on on an agricultural level, I think that would be our greatest legacy.
How do you think about a situation like Cape Town? Like, what happens if that, a major metropolitan literally runs out of water? I remember 3 years ago in LA, I moved to LA, I think 4 years ago now. And you mentioned the droughts in California in 2013, but I think the first 2 years I was here, LA was in a terrible drought and they were asking people not to use sprinklers and, to minimize their shower time and things like that. And it's almost like it's such a meta problem that I don't think we can really wrap our heads around it. I think that's why climate is is so controversial, because it's so large. It's just like we can't comprehend. But what does it look like for a city to run out of water?
Really bad.
Yeah.
Really, really, really bad. I mean, aside from oxygen, like if you run out of water, like people won't live more than a day or two.
What were the contingency plans in place for Cape Town, for example? Do they just truck in, gallons and gallons of bottled water?
Yeah, I mean,
everybody stops showering. We all smell bad. It's all good.
People say that the Third World War we fought over water. Hopefully we never come to that. Cape Town did a remarkable thing. They're not the only city to get that close to actually running out of water. Sao Paulo a couple of years earlier got equally close. But the government took a different approach, which was not to talk about it or make it such a big issue and just try to work behind the scenes. In Cape Town, they took a different approach, which was, hey, we're going to put this in front of everybody on the global news, and we're going to call it day zero. So they literally called it days, and they set a date on the calendar. And at first it was in February, and then the city dramatically cut back its water consumption, and it moved out a few weeks, and it moved out a few more weeks, and it eventually moved out till May, and then it moved out until after the rainy season came, and they were able to avoid it altogether. But in that time, the city cut its water consumption by 50%, which is like absolutely phenomenal. It's really hard to wrap your head around what that looks like for a city to cut its consumption by 50% in a matter of weeks. Some marginalized communities had to line up at water wells to get water for their homes. And so that's really bad. But it was a full-scale effort on everybody cutting back and being more conscious around it. I couldn't tell you what it looks like if we run out of water, other than that it would be really bad. And it'll first get really expensive. And I think that will provide the incentive for people to really cut back.
And yeah, you mentioned this. Some people say that the Third World War will be fought over water. There seem to be some political movements that are happening to secure fresh water supplies across the world. Have you been tracking that at all, or it's kind of you have a business to run?
Sort of loosely and on the periphery. I haven't followed it that closely.
Got it. And so another question, Elon, who we mentioned earlier is, he's got Solar City, SpaceX, Tesla. Do you think you could ever run 3 companies at a time, knowing what you know about running one?
No way. I've thought about that at times. At least not being involved the way that I want to be involved. I think he probably lives a somewhat unsustainable life in terms of just getting to everything and having a certain balance. That's something that's super important to me.
That just rose another question for me. How do you feel about the current kind of entrepreneurship culture in San Francisco?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think about that a lot. We live in an age now where somehow entrepreneurs and business leaders are heralded in a similar limelight as traditional celebrities. And it's really weird phenomenon. And I think it's overblown, and there's a lot of sort of hype and hysteria built around the rags to riches and starting a company and becoming famous, and so sort of perverse incentives for why people do these sorts of things. The reason to build a company or work on a problem is not to make a lot of money. That might be the outcome if you're successful, but it's to work and create something that you think is needed on some level. And it doesn't have to be an ethical or a environmental level for any. It could just be to fulfill a creative itch, creative passion. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on people, and a lot of people sort of come into it perhaps for the wrong reasons. And it can lead to to burnout, something that my co-founder and I have thought a lot about and talked a lot about and got to that place.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how many hours a day are you spending on the business, and do you take days off?
It's varied a lot. For the first year, I worked every single day at basically any hour that there was something I could do, and I loved it. It was what I was most excited about. I was in a relationship, long distance, and so I had the time, and I was new to the city. It got me to the point after the end of the first year where I was neglecting certain important things in my life: my health, fitness, sleep, my relationships. And that was the first time I became conscientious of it. And I took a week off and sort of went on a retreat and kind of did a hard reset. At different stages over the 5 or 6 years we've been working on this, I've scaled up and scaled down how much I work. There are just certain seasons that you need to work a lot more, and you need to work 6 or 7 days a week. But I now am at a place where I'm much more aware of the levers that set me off. And so even if I work really hard for a week or two and get a lot done, the long-term consequence over the course of those couple of months or that quarter is going to be detrimental. So I try to always take at least 1 day off a week where I don't look at email or work at all. Sometimes I take the whole weekend off. And the last couple of months I've been working really hard and working most weekends, but the last 2 weeks I've taken a full day off, and I've just been reminded of the importance of that recharge. I have other sort of rules that I could try to follow. I don't look at email until I get to the office. And I don't look at my phone in my bed. I stopped doing that like 4 years ago. It was one of the best things I've ever done. So no phone in bed. And have space.
It's amazing how huge of an impact removing your phone from your bedroom can have.
Yeah. You have to understand that spaces have a certain power over you, and you have to create and nourish and respect spaces, both physical and non-physical spaces. And so the bedroom should be one of rest and recharging and imagination, and the office should be one of focus and work. And when you're with your friends or with your partner, it should be about being with those people.
Yeah, and I see a ring on your finger. So how has it been being both a husband and a startup founder over the last few years? How do you manage that balance? Because I've started 2 companies, and I could not imagine having done that with a family. Do you have kids as well?
No kids. I got married a little bit less than a year ago.
Congrats.
Thank you. I have a phenomenal wife who's incredibly supportive, and she totally understands the demands. She also knows what keeps me healthy and happy, and so she helps to remind me and keep me on base.
Is she also a Silicon Valley hustler working at a big company or startup? Or
she is a PhD student in philosophy and religion. And so
oh wow, we should have had her on the show as well. We should bring both of you back. Actually,
she would be far more interesting to have a conversation with. I can guarantee you that. We have very interesting conversations over dinner in the evening.
What philosophy would you say has had the greatest impact on her thinking, and possibly on yours, or philosopher?
Well, she's definitely had a lot of what she reads and studies and thinks about has definitely had a lot of impact on me. Even before I started working on Nebia, she was talking about the need to have a sort of change in global consciousness around our relationship to the planet and the environment. And since you asked the question, she is specifically interested in how, what frameworks, be they philosophical, religious, political, economic, or societal frameworks and philosophies have shaped and human society over the 5,000 years of recorded history that we have. And they've evolved in such a way that's gotten us to where we are today in 2020. And it's been fantastic to get us here. Certainly there have been many consequences. There's things that we've messed up, but it's been fantastic to get here. One thing she's convinced of and I'm convinced of, and I think a lot of people think this way, is they're not the same frameworks and structures that are going to get us to the future. And you can see that now, like even capitalism is being put to question. Is the same form of capitalism that we've had in the Western world for the last 30 or 40 years the same one that's going to carry us into the next 30 or 40 years? I think almost everybody would argue no, it's going to look somewhat different. What that difference will look like, not everybody agrees upon. And I think right now we live in an era where perhaps there's a lack of sort of spiritual balance, if you will, and people trying to find more of a connection between purpose in what they do with their working hours, purpose in what they do with their personal lives, and connecting all of those things. So those are the kinds of conversations that we have.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think about that, both of those questions often. And I think it's ironic because I do believe that Silicon Valley has to be at the heart of the change. I mean, there's a cap on growth in nature. When I think about things that just grow and don't stop, I'm reminded of cancer as one example. We don't have giants anymore for a reason in most places of the world. I mean, like gigantic organisms and dinosaurs and whatnot. There's a natural cap, it seems, and the mindset of the Valley is growth at all cost. And so it's like let's just keep pumping more money into the system, more money into these companies, and grow. And they get to a scale beyond which I think they just take on a life of their own, whether it be a company like Facebook, and I don't know what breaking up Facebook looks like, right? Like Benedict Evans is someone that I have huge respect for, and he makes fun of people that want to break up Facebook as, those that are ignorant about the way that the company is structured. But I do know that, a corporation that has such a massive impact on a global scale across ideas and the foundation of truth, that's really challenged. So I think about kind of the future of capitalism as well. And perhaps we don't move to communism, which is like a dangerous word in most circles, especially in, the Valley in New York City where I'm from. And, but, some of the issues of allocating resource in a top-down system could be solved through new technologies, perhaps, or new rules of governance, distributed systems, things like that. Otherwise, I'm intrigued. I love that people in San Francisco are starting to think about living healthier personal lives. I'm also simultaneously concerned with the way that it has become almost. It's like the medium in which you introduce these ideas, the container, is as important as the ideas themselves. So when you introduce mindfulness and meditation and these sorts of, spiritual concepts into the container of growth and competition and productivity, do they then become co-opted to serve the same ends of that broader system, to the point where we have people walking around San Francisco on water fasts, telling you how they meditate 40 minutes every morning, how they haven't eaten a piece of meat in months, they don't drink coffee, or they drink coffee with butter, or whatever it is. And it becomes this like spiritual, philosophical theater, right? That in and of itself is just perpetuating the same issues that we have already. So I think about these things all the time. That's part of the reason why I started this podcast. So I'm happy to chat with you about that stuff.
Mark, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like I couldn't put the situation as I see it any more eloquently. Are we, so sort of to take your question in stages, I think there is something happening in Silicon Valley at the center of tech, at the center of now the biggest industries and the biggest companies in the world, that is moving in a really good direction. I think the system is plagued from a growth at all costs mindset that's baked into the incentive structure. And that needs to change. I think there are a lot of people questioning that. And that's really fantastic. in really healthy. Where that leads, I'm not sure. We will see. On the personal level, I think it's great that that's where it starts. Like a lot of people are having this self-awareness around balance, mindfulness, getting enough sleep, meditating, and sort of the list goes on. Like, people do some more extreme things, from silent retreats to using substances and so forth. And
psychedelics having a huge resurgence.
Yeah. And I think that it's really unfortunate when these sacred rituals and these sacred wisdom and understanding is used as a life hack. These things, these systems, these processes, these rituals are not designed for life hacks. They're designed for some bigger purpose. And people can argue over what those different purposes are, and if people have certain spiritual leanings, that will inform what they think those are for. But I'm of a deep conviction that these things are not just like for life hacks. We are not mechanisms and mechanical structures as human beings. Like, there's something far more mystical about us that can't be explained or understood or hacked, and we just have to be okay with that. So
I love that.
I totally agree with the intuition that you were hinting at. And I think we have a shot in Silicon Valley as tech companies, particularly the very big ones, to move the discourse in the right direction. The movement around B Corps, thinking about multiple stakeholders as key incentives. Mark Benioff is a big champion of this. I think those are the right discussions to have, and hopefully it will parlay into some real change.
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. I think of just meditation as the prime example in my own life. I find myself doing meditation, right? So it's like, I'm going to go do a meditation. Well, that almost defeats the purpose because it's just another box that I'm checking, and maybe that's the way it starts. Like, the path, most in Western world, the path of yoga as an example starts with like an injury or a desire to get more flexible or lean physically, and then that can open up other doors. So I agree. I think it's net a positive. I hope that, it continues to have a growing effect on the Valley and, the broader world. So we're coming up on an hour now. I want to ask maybe just like a couple of rapid fire questions. I've never done this before, but I lost 6 podcast episodes at the beginning of this year, and I'm seeing it as a sign to kind of reset and try to shake things up a little bit. So who has had the greatest impact on your life?
My parents.
Your parents. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Sure. I didn't know how rapid fire you wanted my responses to be.
No, you're right. It's supposed to be rapid fire. I probably should this is what I'm saying. It's brand new. I don't know. It's not rapid enough.
No, my parents, my mom and dad. I'm fortunate to have 2 parents that loved me, that gave everything for me, that believed in me. And, while relationships maybe weren't always perfect, like, I was lucky to grow up in a home where love was without question. And that has formed my self-confidence, my understanding of family and values. So without question, my parents, my mom and my dad. My mom passed away when I was 20. She had a long battle with a lung illness, lung transplant, and so seeing her go through that was a tremendous learning experience, and part of my formation.
I'm sorry to hear that. I know that losing a parent early is obviously painful and challenging. So I'm sure she's proud of you wherever she is.
Thank you.
What's your ideal Friday evening?
Going home and watching a movie with my wife and having some pizza and ice cream or something like that. Living, but that's because I live in San Francisco, and to be honest, the great part of San Francisco, outside of work is the outdoors and the activities you can do on the weekend more than necessarily the nightlife. If I lived in another city, I would probably say hanging out with friends and sort of enjoying the ambiance. But in San Francisco, after a long week of work, that's what I like to do.
Yeah, for sure. What's your favorite outdoor activity?
Skiing.
Nice. Have you gone this year?
I love to ski. I did. Yeah, I was skiing this past weekend.
Tahoe?
In Montana.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Big Sky?
Big Sky, yeah.
Wow, I've never been. How's the snow?
It was awesome. It was a big storm last week, so we had great snow.
Oh, that's incredible. I would say that's probably my favorite outdoor activity as well, snowboarding. So we'll have to hit it sometime.
Yeah.
It's the best. I love to actually just sit in the trees. It's just privileged, but peaceful. Beautiful. Well, I'm going to cut the rapid fire there. It was a good experiment. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience? I'll do link out to the business, to Nebia, some of the press that you've received in the show notes. But is there anything else that you want to share before we go?
It's a real privilege to work and build towards something that you really believe in. And if anybody out there has an itch to start a company or a project, I would say scratch that itch and talk to people that you trust about that idea. And also be judicious about who you talk with about your idea, because an idea in its early stage is very vulnerable, and therefore you are very vulnerable because you are sort of very meshed with this idea. And there are people who will build it up and give honest feedback, whether it's encouraging or not. But you don't want to sort of share your pearls with anybody. It's not about keeping an idea secretive. It's more about who do you trust to speak truth into you and not project themselves onto your idea. So just be wise about who you share that idea with, but definitely share it and talk about it, because that's how it will get refined.
That's great advice, and something I hope everyone listening takes seriously, because that's something that I definitely could have used in my early days as a startup founder as well. So thank you for sharing that. And Philip, appreciate it, man. Hope we get to meet in person sometime soon. And thanks for coming on the show.
Likewise. Next time you're in San Francisco, I'll have you by the office to take a test shower in our showroom.
Oh, I'm in.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. It's been a really fun ride so far. I just get so excited every time I meet some of these incredible people and just love sharing their stories and ideas with you all. You can learn more about the show at thelookuppodcast.com. That's THE, lookuppodcast.com. You can follow me on social media at Wark Meinstein, WARCMEINSTEIN, on both Twitter, Instagram, and Medium, and Facebook. We have a Facebook page for the show as well, The Lookup Podcast, on Facebook. So check us out. You can also subscribe to our mailing list on the website for more future updates. If there's anything from the show that you want to catch, I've posted that in the show links for you to check out. And if there's any way that I can improve, please let me know. Feel free to reach out. If you have any guest recommendations, please let me know. Other than a couple of individuals who are helping me out in the background, this is a passion project, and I'm always open to feedback and any kind of support. I want to thank Sam Palumbo and Patch Kid Music for the sound editing and the intro and outro song that he created. And I want to thank Hello There Collective for their support on my social media. You can check them out at hellotherecollective.com. All right, that's enough for me. I'm sure you're ready to go on to your next activity. Thank you for listening. And please come back again next week for another episode of the Lookup Podcast.